quick round of introductions. My name is Caleb Smith. I am a church coach with Chemistry Staffing, along with doing a bunch of other things. Locally, I'm a residency director for a church plant here in the Orlando area. So let's kind of do quick around the horn. What's your role with Chemistry Staffing, and any other fun detail you want to share? Matt, kick us off.
Yeah, I'm Matt Steen. I'm one of the co-founders of Chemistry.
And how many years ago was that?
It's about 3.5 years ago that we officially kind of kicked this off, but it was one of those crazy little dreams that Todd and I have been talking about for, dear Lord, a long time.
Yeah. And I'm the other half of the squad here. I'm Todd. I'm the other co-founder.
Perfect. And then we have our resident executive pastor in the house.
Yeah, my name is Darrell Roland. I'm executive pastor of Rockbridge Community Church in Northwest Georgia and Tennessee. We're a multi-site ministry and also a church coach here with Chemistry Staff.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to attempt to facilitate a conversation between you three, and looking at kind of now where do we see staffing moving in the future as we begin to, churches are slowly beginning to reopen and beginning to put their plans together on what that looks like. And so there's a lot of things that people will probably start to feel locally within their church. Churches making decisions about whether to keep going with their video services, and whether they keep those streaming or whether they record them and send them out. But then that changes possibly the skill sets that you look for in a church staff. So looking forward to hearing what you guys have been learning and how we can continue to help and resource the local churches. So kind of the big focus that we're moving towards here are 7 changes that we see happening. And then we'll also kind of correlate those into 6 takeaways that we can move with as we continue to push with ministry into the summertime. So I'll Todd, let's start with you. I know one of the first changes that we've talked about is that there's, and this was probably felt by every single pastor, ministry director, was that all of a sudden they have to lead their staff or their volunteers in a completely different way in this season. So what kind of changes have you seen with that? What does that look like?
Well, absolutely. I think it was around March 15th or whatever, at least, when everything kind of came on my radar, and everything, at least where I'm at, everything changed like overnight. For me, the reality check was when my son, who was a senior in college, they closed down all the colleges here in Ohio. And it was like the first major shutdown that happened. And I think that happened like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And by that Sunday, all the churches were shut down. So, I mean, this was something that I don't think a week prior, we all knew about the virus, but we never imagined that it would shut down our churches. So what this leads to, though, Caleb, I think is, and what we're seeing is just a totally different way of leading your staff. And everyone has seen this. We went immediately from on-site staff to kind of scattered staff, on-site gatherings to scattered gatherings. Everything went from on-site to online almost overnight. And really what we've kind of battled through, and the changes we've seen over the last, it's been almost 10 weeks now, is we've gone kind of from how in the world is this ever going to work to, hey, this actually kind of works. Some of this really kind of works. So it's a change, but it's a learning. And what I'm excited to see is as we've kind of been forced down this path of dealing differently with our staff, we've been able over the past 10 weeks to really eliminate a lot of the pain points that we thought existed, that we've been able to innovate and work our way around, so that now 10 weeks later, it's like, yeah, this isn't so bad.
Yeah. And I wonder, even off of some of those lessons, Darrell, with your role and full-time still overseeing a staff at a multi-site congregation, and you guys up there in North Georgia and Southeast Tennessee, with lots of different context and culture, and even kind of not distinctly different cultures going on, but still every little town has their own unique culture, and little church site has their own unique culture. How have you guys felt that different type of leading look?
Yeah, and we recognize, like Todd, it just happened overnight. And one of the things that we began to do is to examine each one individually, but also we still had to maintain a we are one type mentality and culture. So in order to do that, we had to learn how to lead virtually. And we spent some time, I kind of presented some different ways to lead virtually to all of our leaders, and felt like there were really 4 pieces that we focused in on. And the first one was that we had to lead by example. We had to be all in. Everybody had to be all in on this virtual leadership, and lead out of relationships, through it. Every leader we asked to be a champion of this, because every message they communicate and cascade down is going to be a crack in that armor, so to speak. And so even the nonverbals, all those pieces, we got our key leaders involved. So this is the way we have to lead now. We have to be present. We also found out we had to be very strong pastorally in it, because people want to see each other. So we had to spend time on these screens like this, talking to each other and leading them, not just in moments of task, but also in moments of relationship. So encourage them just to put pockets of time just to have hangouts and all for their teams, and then stick with trust. Immediately leaders in this started thinking, well, how will I know they're working? Well, you won't, but you did it before. Just you got to stick with trust. Don't allow that to creep or to kind of leak out of you, so to speak. So stick with trust and just kind of be there pastorally for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those things that you mentioned, I mean, we felt those here, even in a 2-year-old church plant. It's the same concepts. It's just at a different level. But I especially am drawn to what you even mentioned of you have to pastor and shepherd. Like you got to be with your people. Yeah, it's a different way to do it, but it draws out almost like a different skill set. Yeah. And I don't want to, it's not so much that maybe it's a different skill set, but maybe for some of us, it's one that we haven't been exercising a lot lately because of a ministry style. And so actually, Matt, I'd love to now kind of bring you in here on an initial comments, but as a former executive pastor and helping to hire people into these areas and being able to really see what skill sets are needed to do a job well. I can only imagine that your conversations with local churches have dramatically shifted in some of those places about what skill set are we looking for as we begin to look forward into a new type of hiring process.
Yeah. I think some of what we're seeing and part of this for me, honestly, is kind of refreshing, just to kind of speak into what Darrell was saying. There's been a shift back to the pastoral skill set. It's, we have gotten so specialized through the years on so many of these platform-based ministries that, sometimes we've let people come in that, are technically proficient, are really skilled in these, niche areas, but, maybe don't have that traditional pastoral skill set. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that we don't need highly qualified technical people, but we do have to remember that this is ministry and there's a significant pastoral, presence that we need to bring into these types of things. And so churches that have navigated this shift well have shifted their people to pastoral. And some people have done really well, and some people have really struggled in that. We've heard of some churches that have struggled with people, like Darrell was saying, hey, you need to have the hangouts, you need to have the touch points, but just, kind of froze up, didn't really know what to do with that. And so as I'm talking to people, at least, I'm hearing a real desire to bring back that pastoral skill set that may have, always kind of been important, but we just kind of forgot how important, if that makes sense. So we're seeing some of that. I think we're also seeing, a desire for some resiliency and some flexibility, ways that we may not have had before. I mean, we just, like Todd was saying, we had to shift on the fly. Churches that may not have had ever, done live streaming, or all of a sudden live streaming the next, 3 days later. And so churches are looking for people that have a little bit of that flexibility, have that pastoral skill set, but also have the ability to shift and maybe bring some technical, expertise into it, so that, if all of a sudden you have to completely blow up your ministry model, you're going to be in good shape. Todd and I spent some time last night with one of the churches where we place a student ministry pastor, back right around the beginning of the year. And he actually started at the church in mid-February. I think he had 3 weeks in, and then all of a sudden everything shut down. But he brought us a technical skill set that really helped to advance this church's mission, by about 20 years in 3 days, right? Because he helped them get the live stream up and running. He helped them figure out the technical stuff that they needed to do. And they were pretty excited about that. That was kind of an unintended, bonus that came out of that. So I think those are the biggies. It's, hey, we're going to have some different delivery methods in the days to come. So do you have some technical chops? Do you have the ability to do that? Do you have the ability to flex as needed? And do you have the ability to really pastor people through uncertain times?
Yeah, absolutely. And even to, push some into what you've hinted at, and that's a different delivery methods. Darrell, I'd love to hear some of what you guys have found to be helpful in delivery methods within your teams and within your staff, of how to stay connected with them, and then maybe even a couple of items about how you all did you and if you did, how did you change from what you normally would do on a Sunday morning in the main worship moment to provide for a good online experience?
Yeah, I think, and I want to piggyback a little bit on what Matt was saying there. And, with the different skill set of the staff, it's going to bleed into our hiring. It must bleed into the hiring aspect of it. Just last night, I had one of my multi-campus directors reach out and said, we are interviewing several candidates for a student minister position. How much interviewing have you done virtually, and what do you look for in that? And one of the things that I sent to her was the fact of technology. How do they show up there? Do they show up prepared? Is the technology set up? Or are they trying to figure out audio? They're trying to get their video on. Are they on time? All of those pieces will tell you a little bit about their technology. Are they they show their pastoral skills and present during that interview, or they're focused. So it's all of Matt was saying is going to really show up in the hiring processes, or it should, as we move forward. Delivery methods, yes, we pivoted a good bit on that because it did happen so fast. We were, as a church, we were really saying we want to do this perfectly, so we're going to wait till the fall and get all this ready. We had some streaming going on over on YouTube, but it really wasn't that good. We had church online for our delivery method at our other campuses going, but within 72 hours, we had to flip switch and be ready to go. So we had to accept that good was good enough on some areas, and realize that many people want that authentic rawness and all to it in some aspects. That doesn't give us an excuse not to give excellence. But we did switch to that and utilize some different tools to get online, encourage watch parties, block parties, and those are distancing as we move forward. All of our kids material, large group was online with some discussion guides and all to be able to walk through with your kids as parents. Certainly promoting that throughout the service. And the same with our students, just to continue on with them with some virtual graduation type gatherings of people to celebrate them. So those are some of the things, and just continue to do additional things virtually like that.
Yeah. No, yeah. Thanks for sharing those on the ground changes that you guys looked at and felt. I do want to mention, especially for you note takers out there, intentionally some of the changes that we've mentioned. We've mentioned that one change is that we've had to learn how to lead staff differently, different ways of leading staff. Change two is that there's a different staff skill set that will be looked at and will be required for positions, and that we've experienced different priorities in this. And I want to get back to that here in just a minute. But Todd, I'd love to hear a little more from you. A fourth change that we mentioned was different delivery methods. So again, real quick, different ways of leading staff, different staff skill sets required, different priorities, and we've been talking a little bit about different delivery methods. But Todd, I'd love to hear from you in your conversations and the things that you're seeing as ways in which churches should continue to think about delivery methods leading into the future. What are things that they should keep in this change as they look at reopening and however people talk about the new normal, how they engage as they move forward?
Sure. Well, I think the change 3 and change 4, the different delivery methods and the different priorities are kind of together.
Mm-hmm.
And churches really with their online delivery methods have kind of been all over the place, but we're learning tons of stuff. Like a lot of churches have learned, for example, that just particularly in this time when people can't meet physically, just a live stream of a worship team with all the lights and the words on the screen, and the sermon to an empty room, kind of preaching to what is normally a full crowd, might not translate as well to 3 or 4 people watching in a living room. Not all churches have done this, but many churches have. Many churches have done something different as well, totally different with worship. Instead of doing like a big kind of Sunday morning production worship-wise, they've toned it down. They've kind of social distance like in a circle and really done some beautiful worship stuff that's highly post-produced, that sometimes maybe even makes them sound a little better than what they did in person beforehand. So now the struggle is, okay, so now we're starting to reopen our buildings again, but not everybody's going to come back. So now we have to take what we've been doing online, which is really, really good stuff, and we have to also do an in-person gathering. And those two things maybe are not the same. Product is kind of a dirty word, but they're not the same offering, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the changes I think is that many churches are figuring out that streaming your big room experience is not the best answer. That coupled with producing a great online experience isn't the same as producing a great in-person experience. They're really kind of two different beasts. So a lot of that has to do with how it was much easier to make that first switch than what it's going to be to make the second switch, because now all of a sudden you have to do both kind of simultaneously. And then really quickly, that kind of leads into the different priorities. I think many churches have really had to rethink their mission, particularly when it comes back to reopening. And the good news, there's good news and bad news to that. I think the good news is, look, nothing's really changed. The mission's still the same. It's the same mission we had 10 weeks ago. The bad news is that everything's changed. How we do it, where we do it, when we do it, all that stuff has changed. So our priorities need to shift during this time to kind of move that mission forward. One of the things that this isn't going to work for every church, but I'm starting to hear a lot more churches kind of change the way that they're talking about their church. You know, before we heard a lot of churches say, look, we're one church in many locations, right? Yep. It was all totally building based, total facility based. Now we're talking, hearing churches kind of describe themselves as we're more of an online church that has physical locations. Yeah. Okay, so that's a differentiator. But that shift, which is really, we think, going to be really kind of transformational in the way that a lot of churches look at themselves. And again, going back to different priorities and different delivery methods, it's really going to be transformational in many churches, we think.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
I just to kind of piggyback on what Todd's saying, a lot of the churches I've been talking to, it's a realization that, we may be in one physical location, but we're all still multi-site right now. And part of how we need to be approaching that kind of going forward is how do we manage that online campus, and how do we think of that online campus as a campus? So, what does that mean content wise? Because, Darrell, you're in a multi-site, experience, and I've served in a couple of those, and yeah, things are somewhat standardized, but you're still going to have a different feel and different vibe in each of those campuses. So how do we staff our team? How do we equip our team to be able to do that moving forward?
Yeah.
So those are some of the priority shifts that we're kind of seeing happen.
And Caleb, if I may, we just made the decision Tuesday night, our directional elders, to reopen the gatherings for June 7th. So that precipitated a lot of conversation yesterday about how we do what Todd was talking about, our online experience after that. Yep. So we really see this as, during this time when you're not going to have 100% attendance, this is an incredible opportunity to experiment with some different things. So we went back and forth. Do we have a completely separate online pre-recorded piece because of that intimacy you get in that interchange there? Or do we try to blend it because many lead pastors are going to have more energy from the stage and the crowd and all there? So we're going to experiment both during this next month, just to try to see if we can have the right camera angles that can get in there in iMag and capture that, but yet use some pre-recorded worship that are those small worship sets like you're speaking of, so that we can polish it up and still make it a good experience with a live host that's still doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. To give another example, even here in our church. So this summer we have a church planting resident moving here. He and his family. This is something that we obviously we're talking about back before the pandemic really hit the United States. And thankfully, the opportunity still has been there for he and his family to move here. But they're going to be serving in the online campus, online pastor role while he's a resident here. And all of those conversations that we've all hinted at and even mentioned specifically, what's the difference between what is streamed live on a Sunday to what goes out as a part of an intentional online church experience. Our worship pastor right now has been the one who's been putting all of the time and effort into the filming, editing, producing, all of that. But what is it that we actually need to move budget in order to hire on a couple people who can help him? Because once we're back in person, he's not gonna, it's gonna burn him out if we keep going in that way. And that's where these staffing decisions change.
Yeah.
We're kind of, go ahead.
I don't want to stay on that too long, but one piece that my online pastor, who was a campus pastor, sees with pastor's eyes, he said, if we do complete separate environment, we have to consider the fact that during this time of transition back to, I don't even like to use the word normal, back to what church will look like in the future, then people are going to see that as inauthentic too, because they know we're starting the services. So they said, we have to consider that. And I thought that was a great point.
That is a great point. That's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. Well, we've kind of jumped one of our changes, at least in our list here, but that's okay. We're going to keep pushing, and we'll come back to the change that we jumped over. But I do want to move into the change of different staff positions, because we've started to hint at that now, of an online pastor. Again, some churches like Darrell at Rockbridge, you guys have had that for a little bit now already. So that position is not something new, though you may be looking at the implementation of that position in a different way. But even as we talk about what a worship pastor is and does, what a communications director is and does, what a what a tech staff person is and does. Is there a difference between someone who only does tech in the building or does tech just for the online experience? How do those things shift? So, Matt, I'll toss this to you. In different staff positions in that changing environment, what are some things that you've learned and seen, and look at changes into the future?
Yeah. So I think we're going to see new roles, right? We're going to see roles that we never thought, a church of say 500 was going to have, right? We've realized, different delivery methods, different priorities. Oh shoot, we need to staff differently, right? And so all of a sudden over these last 10 weeks, 12 weeks, however long the apocalypse has been upon us, we've realized that communications, especially digital communication, but communication in general, is so much more important than we've probably been making it. And so typically, the communication role has fallen to, whoever was lowest on the totem pole and could somehow manage constant contact and send out a newsletter, occasionally. Right.
So you're saying that we all need to hire a TikTok expert who can get our pastors to dance and do a bunch of things on TikTok now.
You know what? As long as you're not Baptist, absolutely. Sure. We just lost Lifeway. Anyhow, but I mean, what I'm saying is that we need to find some people that are able to manage and intentionally craft our communication strategy. So a communications director, or somebody that is managing online campuses, should be kind of being able to develop, what is our social media strategy? Do we have a social media strategy? Do we have an overall, pardon the phrase, but do we have a style guide that says, hey, this is how we talk, this is what what we're going to do, or this is how we're going to talk about things out there. So we need somebody that's going to own that. And now, the common pushback to that is that, this is something that only big churches need, right? But what we found is that this is really important regardless of size. There's churches of 100 and 200 that are outperforming some of our larger churches because they have people, whether they're on staff or they're volunteer or what, are owning the communication strategy of the church. And they're saying, hey, we're going to be regularly doing this. We're going to be making sure that there is constant touches, whether it's through email, whether it's through, social, whether it's through, video content, TikTok, which I still don't even know what that is. And Brady Shearer is really going to be upset with me for saying that. But those types of things are things that we're going to need. We're going to need somebody that runs point on what that Sunday morning experience looks like, whether it's being streamed or what, so those types of things we're going to need. Now, here's the piece of this. And I think this kind of goes to some of the questions that like Gary had asked, and I'm making kind of a shift to metrics. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Let's go after it.
With the new roles, with all this, we're going to need to rethink how we do our metrics, right? We're going to need to rethink what success looks like. So some of the things that we're going to need to think about is, what is the win? What's the win for some of our online or digital engagement strategy? Is it butts and seats? Is it people being part of a class? Is it, what is it? One of the things I think, and I see happening, and I think this is a really good thing for the church, with this shift in the skill set, and because of the shift in delivery and the shift in position roles, I think we're going to see, us moving back towards having pastors as equippers as opposed to doers, right? One of the things that I think needs to be built into some of these metrics is not, is not this idea that our Sunday morning experience, whether that's online or in person, has to be perfect, whatever that means. We say excellent, but what does excellence even mean anymore? But I think what's more important, it still needs to be done well. Don't hear me, saying that, it shouldn't be, and people should be singing out of tune, but it still needs to be done well, but it needs to be done by other people, right? And if we're not evaluating staff, if we're not including in job descriptions that you're going to develop a volunteer team of people that can do this, and understand that, it may be 80% of perfect instead of 90 or 95. And we're okay with that because we are creating people who can own a ministry and run with that and develop that out. So I think that's some of the ways that metrics are going to shift. I know Todd, I know Darrell, you guys have thoughts on this, so I'll stop talking for a minute if I can. I'd love to hear how you guys are thinking that metrics are going to shift going forward.
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit more about butts and seats. I think this is one of the biggest metrics that churches have used for the past, I don't know, a long time, right? And I kind of wonder. Side note, kind of squirrel here. I wonder what the outreach top 100 list of growing churches is going to look like this year, because that's a buddy count, right? So
Yep.
maybe the top church will be down 20% and they'll be in the top. Who knows? But here's where I think the change is going to be is honestly, butts and seats, your in-person attendance. From what I'm hearing some church leaders say, that might take a long time to get back to what you were 10 weeks ago. It might take 3, 4, 5 years, honestly, for everybody. And because some people just aren't going to come back in person. So let's go back again, 10 weeks ago, with kind of any church that had an online strategy. The online strategy was, look, we want to attract people that aren't coming to our church so that they get to like us, so that they come to our church and that they've put their butt in our seats. I think that's totally going to change. So as you look at what you're going to measure and what your metric is, here's one question I think that every church has to ask. Will the goal always be an eventual butt in a seat and on our physical campus? And I just don't think that's a big change that's going to come out of this, which is really, okay, if we're not measuring that, what are we going to measure? Well, we have to measure engagement, right? So how are we going to measure engagement? It's going to be the number of people serving. It's going to be the number of volunteers. It's going to be the number of people in online small groups and discipleship. Those are the things that we really have to kind of mesh out, because what we measure is what we put our concentration on. So we have to figure exactly what we're going to measure, but the metrics are totally going to change.
Yeah, and I all of those things. I love what you're pushing at. It goes to the example of the churches that have only been talking about how many views they've been getting online, but views are very deceptive because of how each platform changes how many seconds someone watches, that it's counted as a view, and if it's based on devices, then it completely doesn't matter, because even in my own house, we'll have it on our smart TV. We'll have it on, my laptop will be open so I can do interaction with the people watching, and my wife has it on her phone usually. So there's 3 views going on for our worship services.
Everyone is excited about online numbers until Mother's Day, when all the online numbers started to go down. And now you don't hear hardly anybody talking about how good their online numbers are. And it's only going to, maybe I'm cynical, but as summer comes and the warm weather comes and the normal summer slump kind of hits, it's going to be hard for those numbers not to go down some, I think.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
Darrell,
absolutely.
I'd love to hear what you.
Yep, Darrell.
Because we're opening up a huge can of worms here, Darrell.
Oh yeah, worms has been running all around with our ministry, talking about for a while. Everything I'm hearing from other people and in our ministry, the online numbers are just, you can't compare them to anything. There is no algorithm or anything that you can use to arrive at a good number. We almost have to accept that this is a season that we're going to have to focus on engagement, as you said, Todd. And another measurement that we're talking about, and I've heard other leaders talk about it, is participation. When you see the participation online or participate in a ministry or house parties, so many of those things, participation is going to be important. Then we have to think about, how is that going to translate back into the room for those? Many churches aren't set up for participation. So what does that mean for them? And they have to work that out for themselves. But it is an ongoing challenge that's going to be ever changing. I've heard some churches say that we can't wait to get back to normal. And even a large church that I know that said we weren't designed and found it on video. So as soon as this is done, we're going back, no video. And I think there's going to be a lot of churches make some missteps along the way, that it's a both and type mode. And you got to value both groups of people, home, present, all of those pieces. And we're on demand is a big piece we're measuring and pushing that a lot, and trying to maybe even set up some binge watching type pieces we've been talking about, that do series and binge watching and promoting it that way. Talk to people in the language they're used to talking in home.
Yeah, and I'll even toss out there, we talk within different metrics and different ways to engage with people. We just started a little conversation around a new platform, a new app called Quibi, I think it's called, and how we might look to utilize that within our ministry areas, both short term and long term, in discipleship. I know sometimes we can feel that tension of like saying even in discipleship, but this is our reality, and we need to learn how to utilize all of the tools that are at our fingertips for how to impact the world for the kingdom. Absolutely. Want to go ahead and make our last shift here into talking about the last change before we move into the main takeaways for the day. I'm going to quickly run down what changes we've talked about so far. The first is that there's different ways of leading staff. Second, different staff skill sets are going to be required. Change 3, different delivery methods. Number 4, different priorities. 5, different staff positions. 6, different metrics. Just talked about the metrics piece. And now finally is the final change that we've seen is the different staff arrangements. And in arrangement, it's what is it that we expect of staff on a daily basis? How is it that our staff may interact, whether it's in person or virtually? So Matt, what are some of the changes that you expect within how staff arrangement happens? And then as usual, at least so far with our webinar today, Darrell would love to hear kind of what you guys are thinking about or what you've started to practice too. So Matt, kick us off.
And then Todd can say something too, right? Because you didn't mention him specifically.
I mean, he can say something on this one if he really wants to.
Okay. So
I'm the facilitator. Come on, man.
Yeah, I've got the marker. So here's one of the things that I'm really excited to see if this sticks, right? So over the last 10 weeks, we've had a crash course in like remote work, right? And some people are loving it, some people are hating it, some people just are still trying to figure it out. So I think there's going to be something there for remote work in the church. And I think that what that's going to do is I think there's going to be a few things that does. I think one, it's going to free up some of our finances that used to be devoted towards facility for office costs and having everybody together to be put into ministry stuff, right? And so I think if we're able to embrace remote work a little bit more and some of the unique quirks that go with that, I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited to see take root in the church, because I think the time's come. I think a lot of the work world has embraced that so far. I think there's some things that it could be really, really fun to watch that take root in the church. I mean, Darrell, you guys, I mean, as multi-site, your team is kind of spread out already, and so you're doing something like that, right, or no?
Yeah, we were doing some, but certainly not at the level that we needed to be, and so we made a lot of shifts. One of the pieces that we are really pushing is what we call E4. We ask people, it's in job descriptions, it's in every goal is set. It's you have to enlist, equip, empower, and encourage people. So we use E4 as part of our language, but now our staff is truly finding out they can do that virtually. They can do that much more exponentially, because now they don't have to drive to have a coffee. They don't have to go to have a lunch. And they're saving all these monies in our budget that can allow us to do some of those things. So we're finding a lot of cost in that, but really that we have to be able to lead leaders more so to get people. And when I say leaders, lay leaders, people that are sitting out in your seats that are leaders. I've heard statistics over the years that, in a church of 500, you're going to have a team worship team cycle out in 12 months that you don't engage. Well, if that's true with worship, you got it in all other areas too. So we have all this high criteria for leaders. So what we're doing is we're engaging them during this time. There's a lot of people that want to step up. And so they have to be able to lead them. What I have found, and I think our staff is finding, is when you take care of the people, they'll take care of the mission. Then they're focused on the mission, but you got to start first. And I think that's a church culture type piece that may be a shift for a lot of churches where we focus on doing, and for the people in the seats, well, now they're not in the seats. So it's forcing that focus to your staff and to your key leaders.
Absolutely. Well, Todd, round us out here. We've talked through 7 changes. What's the last great piece of kind of advice on these changes before we move to our takeaways for the morning?
Sure. Well, let me talk a little bit about the change number 7, that different staff arrangement.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back 10 weeks ago, before March 15th. I think you'd be hard pressed to find very many churches that did children's ministry online. Matter of fact, there was a lot of pushback. You can't do children's ministry online. You can't do youth ministry online. You can't do online small group ministry. Well, it turns out that you can, and it actually can work. And churches, that's the really cool part of the last 10 weeks, is a lot of churches are starting to figure this stuff out. So as you look at that, I think the virtual piece is not going to go away. We've already talked about that. But I also think on the other side of this, that there's going to be a real acceptance, because we also know, this was another one of our points, that staffing and leading staff can also work sometimes virtually. So we think that there's going to be, it's going to be much more acceptable for churches to be able to hire some really passionate, capable, experienced professionals. But here's what I get really that are going to be virtual. But here's where I kind of get excited about is, I think that, and we talked about this, so it's all kind of coming together, that much of the leadership in the local church, we're going to go from being doers that are staff members to being equippers that are staff members. I think some churches are going to find out that it's really cost effective and it really works to hire equippers that might be virtual, that can really kind of help with the strategy and the vision and the mission, working hand in hand with those local key volunteers in a ministry area. So really, you're bringing your staffing costs in line, because one of the things we didn't mention is we're going to have to do more with our staff with less money, because we've got to do all these things kind of simultaneously. I think there's going to be a really cool thing that comes together, that churches are able to hire some positions virtually that can equip and further engage those local key volunteers to help them build their teams locally. I think that's really cool, and it has a lot of great potential for local churches as we kind of look at how things might be different from a staffing aspect on the other side of this.
Yeah, well, and we'll go ahead for you note takers out there. That's one of our main takeaways. We want to shift here in these last 15 minutes or so. One of those main takeaways is that there is going to be virtual staff members. We see that as one of the things that will become more acceptable moving into the future, that Todd's just described and mentioned, and that they will allow you to hire for expertise, passion, and they will train your key local volunteers, and we'll be able to do that. And that it becomes something that becomes applicable for churches of all shapes and sizes. It's not just the large churches that then can interact in that way. It becomes something that can really help to fuel your mission in your community, in your local context and culture. So that's again, that's one of those takeaways, virtual staffing across the board. Maybe some of you have engaged in virtual staffing when it comes to simply accounting or some HR areas. But we see this here at church staffing or chemistry staffing. We see this as going much wider than that and into more areas. Well, let's keep moving on with some of our main takeaways from today, and then we'll get into a couple things that we think could be really helpful for all of you who are joining us, just to immediately do ways in which we can encourage you all. Online campus and online engagement is going to be key for this next season. Online delivery of ministry programs is not going away. We do not see that ending. Darrell, if you would love to hear from you about what you guys are looking at within maybe some of your extra ministries, whether that's small groups or children's or youth. What are they looking at when it comes to online delivery over the rest of the summer?
Yeah, we in these past 2 days have been talking about some of that, and really we will continue on with all the virtual gatherings with students and pockets of them gathering together, and we'll begin the slow process of moving back together. As we look at the overall, when you're talking about different staffing there, we are looking at how do we have someone locally that handles like the internal communications and things of that nature, but someone who's given the overall oversight to it all with the vision and connecting with it. And again, we'll continue with online and so many different areas and continue to develop that. I think one of the misconceptions that we have as ministry leaders, we think we're being creative, and in reality, we're just showing up. And what I'm asking all of our team members to do is find, whether it be other churches that are on the front edge or companies that are on the front edge, and talk to them and learn from them and network, so that we're not always following in this.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we want to mention, because you've mentioned it some here, Darrell, and we've kind of I think we've hit around it in different ways, but we maybe haven't said it directly, and that is that staffing in the local church is not only about paid people. There are many churches that practice calling key volunteers, key leaders, as staff, even if they're not getting paid. And the pay structure within how the United States Church kind of goes is our construct of ministry implementation, but it's not something that has to be that way across the board for all of our churches. And so there's so many pieces here that are really, it's about, we want to hit harder on, it's the equipping piece. It's the raising up leaders. That is multiplicative ministry. If we just get, I think I'm feeling even the tension in the conversation, maybe a little bit on some of the definition, that if we get too on the side of so now we've got to hire these people, that we're then getting back into the same ruts of the past of only going out and cherry picking certain people from different places and not raising up leaders from within. And really, that's where our whole conversation today and our passion as chemistry staffing falls, is what is it that we can do to help every local church raise up from within their key leaders.
Yep. And Caleb, one thing that we do, and I encourage others to do, is we develop job descriptions for those non-paid roles. We have criteria in which to consider them. We call all our volunteers bridge builders. So we have staff bridge builders. So one of the criteria, you have to give at least 8 hours a week in order to be that. But there is a job description. There is a monthly 15-5 meeting. There is annual reviews, everything tied to that. So they have to be treated and valued like staff members. Yep.
That's a great word there, Darrell, and a good tip for everybody out there. You absolutely write down those job descriptions. They're not something, it's not an HR thing. It's simply a way of helping everyone see what are the expectations and how to engage well. It simply governs the relationship in a healthy way, in a helpful way. I think that goes to one of our other takeaways that we've talked about, or that we have, that we want to give to everybody, is that you will need to staff more and differently with less budget dollars. So staffing in the more traditional sense of it's all about the money is not necessarily the way to move into the future. So we've mentioned a lot of different examples about what that looks like, but staffing differently is going to be one of those takeaways into the coming months and years. We did talk about, but I'd love to hear from Todd, maybe just a little bit more of your thoughts on the pastoral skill sets in combination with maybe in combination with the platform person, or maybe in deference to, but that we need to hire for digital online pastoral skill sets for nearly every position moving forward. What does that look like to you? How does that get implemented in a local setting?
Well, I think Matt gave a great example of that earlier when he said, one of the youth pastors that we placed at a church also had a technical skill set. Okay. So believe me, they weren't hiring a technically skilled youth pastor when they hired him. That wasn't on their radar, but boy, that sure came in very, very helpful. So I think as churches hire, those traditional searches are going to continue on. The youth pastor, the worship pastor, the children's pastor, all of those kind of positions are going to continue on in a local church. But there's going to be kind of an added skill set on top of that is, okay, you're a great children's pastor. Do you know how to connect students or children online? Do you know how to connect with parents online and do virtually kind of what you're able to do on site? Those kind of skill sets are if not required, going to be exceptionally important as churches start to hire. They're always going to look for that on top of what they're normally hiring. So it does mean different skill sets, and then what you had said before, more staff. Again, just going back, just real briefly, for this next season, and we don't know how long it's going to last. I personally think this is going to be kind of, I hate the new normal, but I think it is going to be the new normal, that churches are going to have to do both in person and online. Okay. And you're going to have to do both really well. Most churches have not traditionally done online really well. So you're going to have to start looking, as we've talked about, communications type of a role, a technology kind of a role, if you don't have key people on your staff or in your volunteer team that can do that. Who's going to be the face for that online? Maybe an online campus pastor. And then most importantly, and we're starting to see churches start to hire this already, kind of a digital engagement person. So a digital discipleship person, however you want to look at it. How do you engage those people that aren't coming to your on-site building, but are watching? My hunch is right now that a lot of churches, even though they're totally online, have no clue who's watching online. It's like we've got to get that figured out, right? Other than just seeing who's doing the comments on Facebook, so kind of that they're watching. But I mean, who's watching online? How do we make sure that they're growing spiritually? All of that is either a really high level key volunteer, or probably in a lot of cases a new staff hire, at least part-time or virtually. So it really does change everything kind of moving forward, because you've got to do a lot of different things, and in a lot of cases, as we said, with less budget. Yeah, that's great. Appreciate you sharing those things. And I'm gonna mention a couple of things here, especially to make sure we're respecting everybody's time. We want to end as close to noon as possible. Well, I guess some of you, if you aren't in the Eastern time zone like I am, then it's not noon, but we want to end at the top of the hour as close as we can. But I want to mention some of what we're talking. You've heard us say this. There is something that has not changed. The mission has not changed, and there are the things that are below the line, the things that are the same no matter what. And mission is right there. The mission of the church is always there, never changes.
But a lot of the things that we're talking about is the strategy side of things, the goal setting side of things. And those things are above the line, and those things change depending on the season. Depending on the ministry season, those can be different from fall to spring in any other year where there's not a pandemic going on. So it's just a reminder that we're sitting above the line in a lot of our conversation here, but the mission of the church has not changed. And that's where we can really sit in confidence in. A couple of other takeaways that I'm just going to mention for us that we've kind of hinted around. One is that most churches will need to consider seriously increasing capabilities in technology, communications, and online engagement. If you have not thought about it, if you haven't talked about it, if it's something that even you're like, well, we're actually going to get out of that as quickly as possible, so once we get back to being able to gather in person, we would strongly encourage you to keep in that conversation about how to do it well online. Don't just toss it off. And we would love to help you engage in that conversation. One of the other ones that we've mentioned is that virtual staffing is going to become more and more acceptable for churches of all sizes, all contexts and cultures. Virtual staffing with no geographical boundaries, it will become more acceptable in a lot of places. But one that I wanted to hit on, because there may be, and if we can do this just kind of as briefly and succinctly as possible, there's a part of me that wishes we could talk for another 10 minutes, 15 minutes about this. But Matt, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the last takeaway, that is that maybe not every staff person is going to make it through a transition like this. I know I'm giving you like the really hard one. I am not tossing you a softball on this one.
So make me the bad guy.
That's right, and I'm making you the bad guy. But it is the pastoral part of things that we have to consider as well, and it's something that I know that you and Todd have a passion for helping churches walk through those moments.
Yeah.
And that may be some of the tension that pastors are feeling within this entire future staffing conversation. Is they already may be thinking about somebody who they just aren't sure if they're going to be able to stay on.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'm gonna do the upside first on this. I think one of the cool things about this season is that I think we're going to get our staffing ratios closer to 1 to 100. Paid to volunteer, or paid to attender. I think that's going to be a good thing ultimately for the church, because I think it's going to force us to develop volunteers and have some people that, are in staff level roles that aren't necessarily paid. Okay. So that's the upside of this. I think the downside of this is that there are going to be some awkward conversations that come across, and we're starting to see some churches that are just saying, hey, look, either our financial model has shifted, and we don't know that we can continue to have the same level of staff on board. We just can't afford it. Or, we're starting to see some people that, maybe just don't have the skill set that we need in order to continue this transition. So have those conversations. Please have those conversations. Have the conversations of expectations and, hey, this is where we're going. Don't make this one of those awkward, churchy things where it's like, we don't like to have our hard conversations, so we're just going to let things sit out over there and everything's going to be awkward and miserable, because we're all going to know it's happening, but we just don't want to talk about it. Not that ever happens in any church, but I think we need to embrace that stuff up front. I think we need to care well for people that probably need to move into different ministry roles at other churches, and we need to be honest and loving and caring through this. One of the things that we're doing, and we'll link to this in the notes later, but I mean, one of the things we're doing is we're just helping people through that transition season. Churches will put them into what we're calling transition coaching. 90 days of let's pick you up, let's dust you off, let's get you ready to go, let's have somebody walk through this with your spouse. Let's get you ready for the job search. Let's figure out, how do we create a resume? How do we interview? How has searching changed in the last, 3 years or 10 years or however long it's been. And so that's part of the thing that we're doing. But with those, we'd love to have that conversation with you, even if you're just kind of thinking hey, I've got somebody that I need to release and I don't even know where to go. We'd
Yeah.
love to have that conversation and just kind of walk with you through that season, because everybody hates it and it's miserable for everybody. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for taking on that takeaway. I do want to reiterate that as a team here at Chemistry Staffing, we do want to help in those moments to pastor, shepherd, guide any staff person and their family through that transition season. It is not an only thing on just the individual. It affects everyone that they're connected with, and we want to help in that as much as possible. So as we come to a close here, just a couple of quick things about ways in which you as an attendee today can engage with us, and ways in which we can connect with you, and then what we can expect next week in next week's webinar. So next Thursday, I'll go ahead and do that one first. Next Thursday, we'll be right back here at the same time. And our webinar next week will be how to pastor your flock through this season. You've already been doing it in multiple ways, but we also are now entering into the reopening phase. And there are a number of great examples out there of some sermons of how some preachers have been framing the reopening conversation. One that we've sent out in some of our chemistry staffing emails is to 12 Stone Church, and how they approached it. Approach that announcement and their conversation. But we're gonna really have a dialogue instead of just the presentation side of things. We'll have a dialogue next week about that, how to pastor your flock through the season. It'll be with Dr. Robert Creech. He's a director of pastoral ministries at Truett Seminary, and also with Carl Vaders, a pastor and an author. And we'll be excited to have those gentlemen joining us next week. But we do want to let you all know, again, if there's anything about today that spurred a question or continued a conversation that you'd like to have, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. I believe in the email that's going to be coming to each of you later will be links for all four of us. Pick your favorite. Whoever you thought did the best. Yeah, Todd's pointing at himself. If you like Darrell's mustache, go with him. Matt, if you think Matt needs a haircut, pick his and tell him he needs the haircut. Connect with us. We'd love to have a conversation with you to help you and to help you continue to process through what things are looking like at your church. Or if you just want to, you can just go to Chemistry Staffing's website and you can click on a 30-minute meeting through there as well. And then the last thing really on something to do with this is honestly to show it to one of your other leaders, show it to another key partner there in your ministry. Ask them what they took away as some of the big takeaways from it, and just keep that conversation going. Never are these conversations just meant to be something that we just sit around and let into our brain and then it dissipates and goes out later. It's something that we want to stay completely engaged with. The big message for today is that virtual is absolutely changing some things, and we want to help you figure it out for what that looks like with your community and your church. So remember that you're not alone in this, and we're here to help. Matt, Todd, and Darrell, appreciate you guys. Thanks for your time today, and we appreciate everybody tuning in. See you next week.
Sounds great. See you guys.